Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back. I too am on vacation, having just flown in from not too far from where Tim is. And that's how important this is to us. What I want to do is do a quick overview and some framing. There are many familiar faces in the audience. This is not the same presentation you've seen before, so we're always switching it up, hopefully keep you engaged. Are we going to have time for questions afterwards? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to run through this, but if you've got questions, disagreements, new data, I'm here. So some of you remember this young man, right? This is Mohammed, who was taken out of his school in Texas in handcuffs because he was building a radio. That got him thrown out of school and a visit with Obama. When you look at him soldering his equipment, you have a gut reaction. Some people see him as a terrorist, some people see him as a genius. That backdrop is the water we all swim in, and what we need to be constantly confronting whenever we're talking about diversity and inclusion in tech. Anybody know who these women are? Wild guess? UN agency on something or another. Global, we heard global, right? Global Mothers Against Drunk Driving. What images come to mind? How about that one? Those are internationally renowned scientists in these fields. Not the first thing we thought of. There are actually 2 computer scientists and 1 computational biologist there. These are rock star engineers, and not clear that if any of them walked into your office, you would recognize them as great candidates. So what are we going to talk about? The current landscape in tech. We're going to talk about the pipeline, capital S, pipelines problem. And I was so glad that Tim mentioned that article in the Wall Street Journal. I think we'll talk about how Facebook is framing the issue and also how Facebook is, I personally feel, being a bit maligned, but what we can learn from their lesson. We're also going to talk really briefly about how hidden bias operates. Our approach at Level Playing Field Institute, as Michael mentioned, and Kpork Center for Social Impact, and Kpork Capital, where we invest in seed stage tech companies with social impact. And then I was also asked just to mention Project Include. How many of you read about the launch of Project Include a few months ago? So I'm one of the 8 founding team members and can tell you what we're up to there. On the current landscape, what you may be able to see here is that middle pair of bars. 2 years ago now, the 2014-2015 academic school year, the US became majority kids of color across the US. We're not just talking about a city here or there, a state here or there. National numbers, who's in K-12 education? Kids of color. If you look at the pair of bars on the right, that is the gap with kids of color quickly outpacing white kids. That is your employee base, that is your customer base. There's no better practical reason to be paying attention to diversity right now. In contrast, here's what Silicon Valley's numbers look like, the aggregate of the companies that have been releasing their data over the last couple of years. You've seen this, 2/3 men, with Caucasians being far overrepresented, some Asian groups being overrepresented, some being underrepresented, and African Americans and Latinx being woefully underrepresented. So we've been hearing about this pipeline problem, and that's what Facebook talked about. Not their problem, public education system's broken, that's why they're giving $15 million to code.org, go fix something. We think there is a pipeline problem, and we also think there's a leaky pipeline problem. That framing that it's either or is problematic. We see biases and barriers all across the pipeline that begin in early education. I know you can't read all of that, but we've got pre-K-12 education. When a teacher says to a kid, and I'll be talking in a minute about our SMASH Academy, our Summer Math and Science Honors Academy. We've been running it for 13 years. I was sitting with a group of kids in session a few weeks ago. Every single kid at the lunch table these are all low-income kids of color, half girls. Every single kid at the lunch table had the experience of a teacher saying to them, drop that AP course. 3 AP courses, that's too much. Why are you doing this as a sophomore? Why don't you wait till you're a senior? All kinds of messages, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, it's too hard. That's part of the leaky pipeline, where all this talent is being pushed out. And you see it in post-secondary education, when you go all the way through college and never see a professor that looks like you. Then we see it in every access point, sourcing, interview questions, coding interviews, name any point along the way. It's riddled with bias that chases talent out the door. And then once we get in those companies, look at the retention numbers. Intel, that gets a lot of credit for going out there, transparency, huge $300 million commitment. They have been, in the last couple of reports, including one a couple of weeks ago, their retention numbers for African American are terrible. That's an inclusion and a culture issue. This is not easy stuff, and it's not just one point. It is the entire pipeline needs to be fixed, and we need to make sure that we plug all the leaks and that we hand talent safely from point to point. For those who are looking at business reasons, besides those of your employees and your customers, McKinsey did a study last year looking at what happens to companies that have diversity in their senior leadership and board. If your company has gender diversity in its leadership and board, you have a 15% financial outperformance of others in your industry with less gender diversity. That more than doubles when you get to racial and ethnic diversity in senior leadership and your board. So if somebody is looking at, and it goes to 35% financial outperformance relative to others in your sector. So if somebody's looking for a business reason, that's a pretty good one. So how does this operate? And I'm not going to go through, I will presume by now you've all seen, read, heard, probably dozens of resume studies about just changing the names from Greg and Emily to Lakeisha and Jamal, and who gets the jobs and who gets the callbacks. Study after study after study. We're also looking at it in the world of startups. So what we see is that identical pitch decks narrated by either a male or a female voice, were sent to investors. These were business plans for companies that had already won pitch competitions, so we knew that they were investable ideas. 68% of the judges who saw the same pitch deck and heard it narrated by a male voice invested. 32% of those who saw the identical pitch deck and heard the identical script, but it was spoken by a female voice. So more than twice as likely. So when we talk about objective criteria, we only fund the best and the brightest. We don't care who you are. We only want the best ideas. The data don't support it. And let's remind ourselves that that was the same whether you were a male judge or a female judge. It is the bias in the culture that all of us carry. Very interesting study on intersectionality, and I think we don't talk about intersectionality. All of us have multiple descriptors and demographics. When we talk about gender, we don't often enough talk about, are the experiences of women the same? Are they when it's African American women, when it's Latinas, when it's Asian American, when it's Caucasian? Often very different experiences. This study was done about the experiences just amongst women who were scientists or engineers in some kind of STEM field and their experience of being assumed to be administrative staff or janitorial staff. And what you see is that that experience is not evenly distributed. That if you are an African American woman, if you are Latina, you are twice as likely, at least, to be assumed to be in an administrative capacity or a janitorial capacity relative to your Asian and Caucasian counterparts. Some people say, oh, what's the big deal? You know, that's just ignorance. It is ignorance, and it has a cumulative effect. Level Playing Field did a study across all kinds of corporations 10 years ago. We're repeating it this year just in tech. We started with 19,000 professionals and managers, looked at who left corporate America and why, and we looked at those specifically who left due to some form of perceived unfairness. It turns out that 13% of those who walked out the door had had that experience, cumulatively, of mistaken identity, of not being assumed to be who they were, to be able to contribute what they could contribute. So if you're worried about your retention numbers, as Intel is, as everybody should be, think about what's going on in the hallways, what's going on in the day-to-day observations and interactions of your employees. From that corporate leaver study, 3.5 times more likely are people of color to leave corporations voluntarily solely due to perceived unfairness. In addition to the mistaken identity, one of the ones that tops the list is being sent to every possible recruiting fair, community event, job fair, representing the company, while their majority counterparts are back home getting mentored, getting plum assignments, and then when it comes time for promotion, they're passed over because they haven't put enough time on the projects. If you're doing diversity work at your company, it ought to be valued and compensated as a full-time real job, not as the second or third voluntary job that you are doing. Right now, as I mentioned before, tech is looking at diversity as an either-or problem. It's either a pipeline problem, and once Facebook, Maxine Williams, came out and made that statement, and she believes she was unfairly quoted by the Wall Street Journal. And she wasn't just saying it was a pipeline problem, but that is the way it was spun. There was an immediate and I think vicious response. I'm not excusing Facebook or their numbers. They can and should do better. But I think there was a very vicious attack on Twitter with a hashtag FBNoExcuses going after Maxine. And I wonder if they would have gone after a white woman with that level of anger. So I think there's an alternative, which is to see that you've got both the tech culture and the pipeline as sharing this culture of bias, and it explains the problem we face today. There is no simple solution. It's not writing a check to fix public education, and it's not doing better on the recruiting end. It is a much more comprehensive approach. I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in our family of organizations based in Oakland, California, to look at these issues. Here's our core belief, that genius is evenly distributed by zip code, but opportunity is not. If you believe that, then you organize your activities to act on that. So we're looking in many places about how we're approaching disparities in the tech ecosystem. So I mentioned our SMASH program, our Summer Math and Science Honors Academy. I'll tell you a little more. We just finished our 13th summer on 5 campuses. We're expanding. For those who are New York-based, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, whose district is Brooklyn, reached out to us a few months ago and said, we want a SMASH Academy in his district. So anybody who's interested in bringing SMASH to the New York area, come see me. We are also doing a lot of original research and also going to be funding hidden bias research as it impacts tech hiring and inclusion. We are also doing a lot of community engagement work. On our philanthropic side, we were amongst the first funders of groups like Black Girls Code, Brothers Code, Hidden Genius Project, many of those groups to get them launched. And then on the investment side, as I mentioned, investing through Kpork Capital in social impact tech companies. I'll tell you about a few of those. This is a little bit about our SMASH program. We take low-income kids. The majority are eligible for free and reduced lunch. They're the overwhelming majority first in family to go to college. And we take them for 5 weeks each of 3 summers of high school. And they live in the dorms on a college campus studying STEM in a context of social and racial justice. They're also taught social skills. They're also taught public speaking skills. And I'll tell you a little bit. You can see some of them. Right now, this past summer, we had 246 scholars. We have 500, that number goes up actually. We have 500 SMASH alumni who are in colleges now, if you're looking for interns. I think that's Harrison Harvey on the left, who's a high school junior, and he spoke at an event in California. Congresswoman Barbara Lee from our district happened to be there. She invited him to go address the Congressional Black Caucus last year in DC. So we flew Harrison and his mom to do that. So here are our data. 79% of the kids are eligible for free and reduced lunch, 76% first-generation college-bound, slightly more girls than boys, and we've been 50-50 over the 13 years. And here's our African-American, Latinx, Southeast Asian, again, whoever is underrepresented in tech. And we will look differently as we go to different geographies. Morehouse was our first campus outside of California. These are 3 companies that are in the Kpork Capital portfolio. And let me just tell you really briefly, if for any of you any of you heard of these companies, read about them? Really, really, really quickly. LendUp is disrupting payday lending, where you're rebuilding your credit score, building a FICO score, graduating. Every time you make a payment on time, your interest rate goes down. Take a financial literacy course, your interest rate goes down. It is to get people out of the spiral of payday lending. There is no shortage of great for-profit businesses that close gaps of access, opportunity, or outcome for low-income communities of color. We have about 120 in our portfolio now. Pigeon Lee, that's Frederick, who was the best marijuana logistics guy in his neighborhood. He didn't live in Colorado or Washington, so he did a little detour to federal prison. And in there, he learned a bunch of things, and he came out and started a wonderful business focused on radically reducing the cost of phone calls to and from prison. They're still $3 and $4 a minute. It is a racket, and prisons are very far removed from cities and from public transit and from ways that families can stay in touch with the incarcerated. So he's got a whole series of products in addition to phone calls, getting photos in the form factor. You can just send them from your phone, and he'll get them into the form that is accepted in each of the prisons, which differs by jurisdiction, so you can stay in touch with your loved ones. He's building a huge database of the currently, which will be the formerly incarcerated, to move into jobs for them. Pre-K-12 Plaza is based here in New York. She's got offices at the UN Incubator and upstate in Albany. She is building a multilingual platform, 25 languages, for Title I schools so that parents and kids and teachers can toggle back and forth between the native language and English and get involved in kids' education. The educational outcomes are staggering. She's in more than 300 public schools here in New York City. She's expanded to Los Angeles. She's growing incredibly rapidly, has more than 60 employees. She actually hit her 2016 numbers in March. Speaking as an investor, we love that. Speaking as an impact investor, that means that many more kids are closing that achievement gap. English language learners are the lowest performing students across the US, and she's fixing that problem as an immigrant from the Dominican Republic herself. This is what our portfolio looks like. About 60% of our companies have a founding team member who is an underrepresented person of color or a woman from any background. We blow anybody's numbers away. And we are not trading off any financial returns. We had 50 engineers come speak to our Smash Scholars in Northern California. 50 engineers of color from our portfolio companies come speak to our Smash Kids this summer. We've pioneered, in honor of Frederick, a new sector, POT, but this is a different kind of POT. This is People Ops Technology. We held the first ever POT competition last year. Companies that are mitigating bias using technology to fix tech companies. Taking the biased language out of job descriptions. Creating, how many of you have heard that study where orchestras started screening people behind the screen and the demographics changed? We have a company that's done that for coding interviews. It's called interviewing.io. Here are a few that are in our portfolio. Make schools an alternative to a top-tier computer science degree. No money up front. These are some of our others. Jopwell, based here in New York City, diversity recruiting platform. You may have heard about it. 2 African-American co-founders out of Goldman. Unitive, which has a whole suite of enterprise products, starting with taking the biased language out of job descriptions, but moving into analyzing biased language in performance reviews, all kinds of things. Interviewing.io, the one I just mentioned, they also added voice masking. You don't know anything based on voice about gender or other things you could assume about who the interviewer is or the interviewee. WePal does video structured interviews. All the data suggests structured interviews are the least biased way to do interviews. Glassbreakers, which I understand AOL is doing a, yes? Great, Twyla. Glassbreakers is in our portfolio. They are an enterprise software solution for employee resource groups connecting with each other, connecting across offices. If you've got more than 10,000 employees, you've got multiple offices, and you've got people in ERGs within your company who've never met each other. And it's a way for them to coordinate their efforts. ProSky is a way that you can do performance-based hiring. You can give people projects and hire based on competency, not based on what school they went to. We're the first venture capital firm to put out a founder's commitment. At January 2016, any company we fund January 2016 forward, as a condition of investment, we'll have to sign a pledge for diversity and inclusion. We offered to our companies already in our portfolio, if you would like to, we're never going to retroactively impose anything. 80 companies said we're in. You can see who they are up here and on the Kpork Capital website. We ask 4 things. We ask that they set their goals. We don't set them for them. We say, figure out who your customers are. If your customers are kids in Title I schools, then it's in your business interest that your employee base look like your customers. And so each company sets their own goals based on their business. So we've got a little acronym there of give. The second is invest. Invest in whatever tools or resources make sense for your business. And again, they're lean startups, so there's not a lot of investment dollars there. But as they grow, we'll certainly get them connected to your efforts here. The V is volunteer. Go be a role model for kids who've never seen an engineer or a CEO who looks like you. I can't overestimate the importance of that. There is no way to overestimate being a teenager, seeing somebody who looks like them, who grew up in their neighborhood, who's now running a startup. And educate yourself and your employees. Those are the 4 things we ask of our founders to do. So here, we walk the talk. Half of our partners are African American, 2/3 of our investment team. There are only 2 white people, and I'm one of them at Kpork Capital. And we're going to retire soon. 2/3 of our investment team are African American or Latinx, which on the West Coast is the preferred term, a non-gendered Latina, Latino. And over half of our investments, as I mentioned, have someone who's considered underrepresented in tech. Those are some of my colleagues. Brian Dixon on the left is a partner. Jorge is an analyst. Carolina is a principal. Mandela is our portfolio services director. Anthony is an associate. I was asked to just briefly tell you about Project Include. And the tagline is give everyone a chance to succeed in tech. 8 of us came together as a voluntary effort. You see and recognize some familiar people. Erica Joy Baker is quite out there on Twitter and on Medium. She's an engineer at Slack. Bethany was an engineer at Facebook, has her own startup. Tracy Chow just left Pinterest, and she's been doing a lot of things encouraging transparency about salaries, about all kinds of things. Laura Gomez was an engineer at Twitter, has left to start her own company, Atypica, which we invested in. Yvonne has her own Ready Set consulting firm on diversity. That's me. Ellen Powell, who's an engineer by training and is probably best known for suing Kleiner Perkins, is the one who deserves credit for bringing us all together. And Susan Wu is an investor actually now based in Australia. So what we've done, most of the group are engineers. And between us, we have 150 years of tech experience. We open sourced 87 recommendations on diversity and inclusion. Take them, use them, improve them. They're there for the big common goals. Every category up there could be improved by tech-based solutions. The bullet points on the right, defining culture, implementing culture, employee life cycle, training, resolving conflicts, measuring progress, and leading SVCs are the chapters. It's projectinclude.org. You can take a look. We have 3 basic core beliefs at Project Include. Inclusive. We believe in all groups. We believe in intersectionality. And one of the things that's been most sobering is the number of groups who reach out to us and say, we're doing the same thing. We're focused on getting women on boards of directors. You look at their staff, they're all white women. And we say, no, we're not focused on the same thing. Sorry. If you're interested in intersectionality, come talk to us. If you're not, we got plenty of folks that do want to talk to us. Comprehensive. This is not a write a check or put a program in over here. This is a comprehensive solution, and accountability and metrics. So I want to just leave you with a few steps to think about on mitigating bias and building empathy, which I think is key to what we're doing here. So we're asking you to examine every single step along the pipeline into and through your company. We are not going to move the numbers as an industry until every single leak in the pipeline is plugged. So support those pipeline organizations. And the directory that you just saw is a hugely important tool in helping to do that. Everybody know the Rooney Rule? Yes? Which basically says you don't get to diversity unless every candidate pool is diverse. I don't care how important that job is, don't start your interviews until the pool is diverse. If the candidate pool isn't diverse, you'll never get to diversity. I think one of the best ways to build empathy is to put yourself in the experience of being underrepresented or an only, if that is not part of your lived experience already. Join a board where you're the only on that nonprofit board. See what it's like to be underrepresented. See what it's like to sit and listen when you're not familiar with the dominant culture. And then finally, we're from California, we want everyone to invest in pot.
We have time for a couple questions. Any questions for Freada?
Over here. Hello?
Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, I want to thank you for raising the coder, not custodian point, because I think that is, I think it's something personal to a lot of people in the industry, right? So I work here. I started working here in the building about a year ago. Was here late one night, went out and got dinner, and came back with my food to eat at my desk, and was approached by somebody who said, hey, I want to change the credit card for the payment. Can I do that with you? And this has happened many times before, right? Where I've been mistaken for the Chinese delivery guy, right? And then I was like, no, sorry, wrong person. And I just kind of went in, and then I came up to the office, and I saw that person. And there's a moment, right, of, wow, I'm 46 years old. I closed $30 million deals, and I'm still seen as somebody within my peer set, within my colleagues, as somebody who is the delivery guy. And I mention this because it happens to many of us, and the statistics show that, yet I don't think we talk about that enough. Because when I try to put myself in the shoes of people who are not in this minority set, and I try to think about, wow, that never happens to him. Like, he is never, ever mistaken for the custodian or the delivery guy or the housekeeper. And I realized that telling that story and sharing those experiences with as many people as possible is vital for us to for people to understand in the minority what it is, what the daily drag is, right? Because it pretty much is like trying to do your regular job driving with the parking brake on, right? Because you're always reminded that you are seen differently to the extent that somebody mistakes you for somebody who's in a completely different role, class, right, than what you have achieved. And so thank you for raising that, because that's something that I think many of us have experienced, but I think it's something that is very easy to spotlight and very powerful from the standpoint of, if you tell people you think that somebody didn't get a promotion because of their background, that's very easy to argue. Oh, well, there's a lot of other factors. The fact that I was mistaken for the food delivery guy is unmistakable why that happened, right? And so, again, I want to thank you for raising that.
You're welcome. Thank you for your comment. And it's really important that we create safe spaces, and I hope it's through ERGs and other mechanisms, to create safe spaces for these stories to come out. Because everybody who hears that story learns something, thinks about, oh, would I have been that person? Have I thought that? Let me also make a very quick comment, which is there is nothing wrong with being an administrative person or a custodial or janitorial person or a food delivery person. All of those jobs deserve respect and dignity. But if you are one of the kids from our SMASH family, if you've spent part of your life homeless, living with your family in a car, and you have sacrificed everything, and every day for many of these kids is a choice between buying lunch or taking the bus, because there's not money for both. So am I hungry today and get home quicker, or do I eat today and take a long walk home? That is daily life. If you've gone through all of those hurdles and you get hired here or anywhere, and then somebody says, oh, I noticed there was a spill on the floor down there. After all of that, it's really amazing. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Carol Watson, and thank you for what you're doing and the work that's happening. I wanted to bring attention to a potential bias around only paying attention to underrepresented groups. After 10 years of doing experienced, hired, diverse talent recruiting and now diversity best practices, one of the research that I saw recently was around the percentage of college graduates in computer science that were being directed to IT, that are not even being thought of in a lot of these roles. And so many of the people in this room come from very exceptional backgrounds that are, we're not paying attention to people that already have a lot of experience and have great backgrounds. So as we're looking for talent, making sure that we're paying attention to those that are already college graduates, already in the industry, and don't assume the bias that they may be underrepresented and underprivileged backgrounds. Also, there was some research around pipelining, and they were saying that you need more than one person of color, another person, two women that are women, otherwise they will not get hired. So when we're thinking about diverse pipeline and the Rooney Rule, it's important that we have more than one, or else that person won't be hired. So I just wanted to share those two pieces.
Thank you. The research also indicates that, if you've got 8 engineering teams, let's say, and you've got 8 fill in the blank, some underrepresented, you've got 8 African American, 8 Latinx, 8 women engineers, you would think about, oh great, I'll put 1 per team. All 8 are going to leave. What you want to do is put 2 at a minimum on each of 4 teams and leave 4 teams undiverse. Because all of the pressure, stereotype threat, imposter syndrome, all of it kicks in much more strongly when you're an only. So very important on our way to being diverse that we not put people in situations of being an only. Other?
Hi, Singleton Beato from the 4As. My question is, what can you point us to, or what tools or support can we look to for retention? We have at the 4As a lot of amazing programs to pipeline diverse talent into our industry, to train and develop those folks. And we just had 134 amazing college students come through our MATE program and be hired. We've got a 90% conversion rate. I got over 100 kids that come every summer. But the key really is, how do we retain them? And so I know that you have access to a lot of intelligence and tools and information. So what are some things that we can look to keep these multicultural folks after we hire them?
Well, that's the I part of D&I. Inclusion means focusing on changing the culture. I think it's really important that we not look at the model of getting underrepresented people trained to fit in, that we need companies that are transformed to be truly inclusive. So that means examining every part of your culture. How likely is it that someone is going to be like the gentleman who spoke up, that somebody in the halls of your company who's walking with food, if that person is Chinese or fill in any other race or gender, how likely is that person to be mistaken for somebody else? The more we can do to make sure that the underrepresented talent in our companies is championed, is visible, to remind people this is the talent that we're looking for, it's already here. But unless you focus on culture, and it's one of the things in our 87 recommendations at Project Include, if all you do is focus on getting people in the door, you're going to have a revolving door, and very soon you're going to have a reputation that that's not a hospitable place, and you're going to have an even harder time getting people in the door. So you've got to make sure that hiring managers not just de-bias the interview, but de-bias their team and create a safe place for people to speak up about their experiences.
Thank you, Freada. I want to move on if we have any time after our next speaker. Thank you.